Best part of the job, feed and treat. Come on. Oh yeah, I'm gonna get these.
That's Dallas, Bobby's best buddy.
The peace and tranquility you see these horses enjoying belies the horrific circumstances from which they were rescued. Hi, I'm Susan Kane. This is Real Horse Rescues. Today, we are at Equine Advocates, a 140-acre sanctuary in Chatham, New York. Our special guest, Susan Wagner, founded the organization in 1996. Since then, she has saved the lives of countless horses, donkeys, mules, and I'm sure a plethora of other four-legged animals as well. So come on with me and let's go meet Susan Wagner, a real horse rescuer. You are a girl from the Bronx. You rode your first horse at 5. I understand watched Secretariat win the Triple Crown in 1973, and the next day got a job at the racetrack. How did you end up from that scenario to this?
Well, like a lot of very young girls, I was in love with horses. I was horse crazy. This is nothing unusual. From the time I was 3 years old, I was in love with horses, and you know, I rode horses in the Bronx. And I used to spend the summers with my grandparents, and I used to see horses in the country. And I remember it always striking me, seeing horses out in the pasture, as opposed to the tie stalls they were in the city where I used to ride, even though my father, you know, didn't really know what he was looking at. He just knew that I wanted to ride. But he didn't really think about the way the horses were kept in the city stables as opposed to the way they were in the country. So that had a very profound effect on me, and it always occurred to me that they should be living in a pasture. And I think that becomes obvious to a lot of people who love horses, and regardless of when you first become aware of them. But I got a job and spent 15 years in the racing industry because I loved horses. And a lot of young women work at the racetrack because of that. And I spent 15 years there, and I worked in different capacities, from actually moving to Maryland and working at Vanderbilt's Sagamore Farm to coming back to New York. And I actually was a jockey's agent for a while, and I wrote for horse magazines. But I decided that after 15 years, I wanted to make some changes, and I didn't feel that I could. There were certain parts of racing that I really loved, but then there were other parts of it that I felt, well, I don't know that I'm going to be able to make any changes. So I left, and I got a job working as a wild animal keeper for a zoological institution, and that's where I rescued my first horse. I was working in the Bronx and then moved to Queens because they opened a chapter in Queens, and they had 2 horses there. And one of them, Gandalf, was a horse that was kind of crabby, and he was not good with children, and so they were going to get rid of him, and somebody said, well, he'll probably just go for meat. And I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, you know, they eat horses in Europe and Japan. You know, we'll just send them to a dealer. So I just felt like the air was like someone had hit me, and I fell. And I started to research this and realized, while all those years I was working in the racing industry, that these horses were going to slaughter, and I didn't know it, at about 16 horse slaughterhouses, all foreign owned and operated, that were situated in remote areas all around the United States. And so myself and another co-worker and an ex-boyfriend that I had in Maryland from when I lived there, he had a small 10-acre farm, and so he took Gandalf because I couldn't really keep him in Queens, which is where I was living at the time. And also at the same time, a little miniature horse needed a home. Rain Man, who is still alive, he's here. He was rescued by a woman on Staten Island, and then she couldn't keep him, so she had called the institution, the zoo, to take him, and they knew I was taking this other horse, so I told my ex-boyfriend, well, take a detour to Staten Island and grab him. So I got those 2, and those were the first 2 horses I ever rescued. That was back in '94, and then 2 years later, I founded Equine Advocates After I left the zoological institution, I started working for a nonprofit, and that's where I learned about nonprofits. And I thought, day one, I'm going to start one, but except for horses, because I had all this experience, and I didn't know what to do with all my energy and the knowledge that I had picked up through all those years. And then I thought, well, this is what I want to do. So sometimes, you don't always figure out what you want to do when you grow up until you're, way past a certain age. But, it's what I knew I had to do once I realized what was happening. And so I founded this organization with the idea that I wanted to see an end to horse slaughter. And that's why I started it. And then we evolved after 8 years of operating from an apartment in Queens, and everybody says, what? But I had horses all over the place. I had them in boarding facilities and in foster homes, and some I adopted. And then 8 years later, we were very lucky to acquire this property. And so now we evolved into a sanctuary and a humane education center, which I do believe education is really the answer to everything. So I think we're doing the work we need to do by educating people. They're just so full of the devil, these guys. They're just so funny. Like they're up to something. It's like what can I do next to cause trouble and mischief? So he's been written up in the New York Times, has been on television. That's Dallas, Bobby's best buddy. And Dallas was a former camp horse who we rescued in 1997. If you want to send your kids to a camp where they can expect to see the same horses year after year, then you have to do your research. They're really best friends, these two.
This broadcast of Real Horse Rescues is underwritten by the Unbridled Thoroughbred Foundation, an organization dedicated to the betterment of equine welfare by providing educational programming, guided by the belief that every equine life deserves humane treatment, compassion, respect, and protection from harm.
Been a long, long, lonely train. They never told me when I said sail. I thought I'd been away from home. Been through the darkest night of my home. Now I'm starting to see the light of my home. Learned a lot about myself, did not know. I found the courage to be myself. I've come home. Been through the darkest night of my own.
Yeah, rolling.
We rescued Dallas and 26 other camp horses and ponies in one of the very first major rescue operations in our history. I founded Equine Advocates in 1996, and in April of 97, we heard about these camp horses and ponies that were going on the auction block, and so we went to court to buy them and bid against the killer buyers and won. And at that time, we didn't have a sanctuary, so I had to find homes for all of them, including Dallas, who was adopted for about 11 years and then came back to us. And luckily, we had the sanctuary by then. And he was able to come here. But the camp horse issue is a very important issue because a lot of camps that are seasonal lease their horses from killer buyers and killer brokers. And then at summer's end, they end up going to auction and sold for slaughter. Now, there are some very good camps out there that keep their horses all year round and retire them. So it's just a matter of the customer being aware. If you want to send your kids to a camp where they can expect to see the same horses year after year, then you have to do your research and make sure that they don't send horses to the slaughterhouse. Because, as Dallas says, camp horses do go to slaughter at an alarming rate, and they go at summer's end. And I can also recommend that one of the best kinds of horses that you can rescue are camp horses. And there's a Unadilla sale in New York where they have a camp horse sale at the end of the summer. If you go there, rescuing one of these guys, they're bomb-proof. And just with a little bit of TLC and rest, you have a great horse. Well, Bobby is the one who got away, and his name is Bobby to Freedom, and he is probably the most famous horse we have here. He's been in the New York Times and all over television, and this is his best buddy, Dallas. Bobby was an urban carriage horse in New York City, and the urban carriage horse trade is an issue that we're very involved with, because while we don't object to people driving horses the same way we don't object to people riding horses. Driving horses is fun, but that's not what the urban carriage horse trade is. What that is horses in the middle of traffic, emergency vehicles, cars, buses, working 9 hours a day to make a certain amount of money in order to occupy a stall. And then when they can't make that money, they disappear, like so many. Now, Bobby was the one who got away because he ended up in a kill pen at a slaughter auction in New Holland, Pennsylvania, but somebody spotted him because of the 4 digits that were carved into his front left hoof, which is the license plate for New York City carriage horses. And so he was spotted. He was part of a brokerage program, which was very lucky for him and for us, and we were able to get him. And he's been here since 2010, and he's one of the few rescued New York City carriage horses that we can identify, because according to the Coalition to Ban Horse-Drawn Carriages, there are 60 to 70 of the 180 that disappear every year without a trace, and we believe that they are laundered through killer buyers and killer brokers and just disappear, and then they're replaced with other horses. So we support the legislation in New York City to ban the urban carriage horse trade because, first of all, it's not natural for horses. Secondly, where do they end up? We know where Bobby was going. We can't speak for all of them, but we don't know where the others are. If you talk to the carriage horse operators, they will say that these horses are business assets. But why shouldn't they be allowed to be retired or sold or given to sanctuaries where they can live out their lives? You know, police horses don't have the same fate as these horses because, first of all, they don't work as hard. There aren't as many of them, and often the officers adopt those horses. So even though they live part of their lives in the city, it's not the same grind as these horses. It's not even in the same category, and that's why we object to horses being used in big cities like New York, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago, wherever you have a big urban center. And if you notice, this is a scar, a permanent scar on Bobby from the severe equipment that he was forced to wear because, you know, horses are not just going to stand in one spot. They're flight animals. So very often this equipment that they use to control them, they use pain to control them so that they don't spook. But then every now and then you'll hear about a carriage horse that does get away or runs amok and they get killed or people become injured. It's really as much a human safety issue as it is a horse protection issue. So we feel that the sooner the urban carriage horse trade ends in New York City, that will be a great thing. And they already did it in Salt Lake City. They've done it in other cities, in Toronto and other places around the world. And it's just a matter of making New York City, which is a great city, even greater. The vet pulled her off the trailer and was going to euthanize her because she couldn't walk. And Mindy said, "I'll take her."
Coming up, the miraculous rescue and dramatic recovery of Press Exclusive. Real Horse Rescues will be right back. Mark your calendar, July 30th, 6 to 10 p.m. at the Canfield Casino in Saratoga Springs. It's Equine Advocates' 14th Annual Awards Dinner and Charity Auction. This year, honoring the legendary equine and political cartoonist Peb and Eclipse Award-winning writer Bill Heller. Live auction gifts include one-of-a-kind collections, original artwork, and celebrity VIP packages. All proceeds from this event will benefit Equine Advocates Horse Rescue, Sanctuary, and Humane Education programs. For tickets and more information, call 518-392-0175 or visit Equine Advocates online at equineadvocates.org. Press exclusive hails from the Sport of Kings. She won over $436,000 for her connections. When her racing career ended, she served as a brood mare and produced 9 foals. Despite doing everything that had been asked of her and her years of service, not even 8 months after giving birth to her last foal, a filly, she was found traumatized and trampled on a slaughter-bound truck.
Well, unfortunately, this is more common than anybody would believe. Her story, despite the fact that she won all this money, despite the fact that she had 9 foals, and despite, as you said, did everything that anybody wanted from her, still ended up being scrapped for slaughter when she outlived her usefulness. And you would think that with all the money that she earned, that's just the money she earned on the track. But think about all the money with the stud fees and the cost of the foals and all that money. You have to figure she must have generated about $1 million. Not one of those people stepped forward to give her a forever home. And that's the tragedy of what happens to performance horses when they can't generate a profit anymore. So Press was really more dead than alive. And the fact that she survived is literally a miracle, because she was pulled off a slaughter truck. She had been stepped on and trampled. She had 4 broken ribs. She had her head stepped on where she couldn't open her eyes. Her eyelids actually have slits in them still. And then she was just miraculously rescued by this woman named Mindy Lovell of Transitions Thoroughbreds in Ontario. The vet pulled her off the trailer and was going to euthanize her because she couldn't walk. And Mindy said, "I'll take her." And she slowly brought her back to health, she always knowing that she might have to euthanize her. And then slowly she came back, and we heard her story and offered to give her a forever home because she deserves to be in a sanctuary. Now, not every thoroughbred makes that kind of money. We have thoroughbreds here that aren't even registered, but no horse deserves to go to slaughter. They're the responsibility of the industry that breeds them and puts them on this earth. And so we're hoping that through her story and others, that the public will demand that people take responsibility for the horses that they breed.
How do you feel we can influence an industry to accept responsibility or take responsibility? It seems in thoroughbreds, standardbreds, or any of the horse activities where the horses are commoditized, there is simply no concern for their sentience, or as you said, once their useful years are done, they're just thrown away.
Well, there has to be a whole new mindset, and maybe that's for the next generation that considers these animals part of the family. You know, one of the things that really gets me is that they say, okay, off-the-track thoroughbreds being retrained to do showing, hunters, jumpers, you know, all these other things. That's fine, but they're still athletes. But then what happens when they can't perform anymore? Because we all get old. So then they need to be put into a kind home. We have thoroughbreds here that were show horses, and then when they couldn't show anymore, then they needed a home. We have thoroughbreds here that had been put into school programs, and then they were on their way to auction. So just because they are trained for another quote-unquote job, that doesn't mean they're going to be protected for the rest of their lives. And I think that taking responsibility involves either placing them in a kind home or humanely euthanizing them. That's certainly a lot better than sending them to slaughter. But as I said before, if we end horse slaughter, that will solve a lot of these problems, because then, like it or not, everyone's going to have to take responsibility for them. Right now you have the people who do because they care and they are responsible, and then you have the people who don't because they don't have to. But take away that option, and then you're going to see a big change in the way a lot of these people operate. And I think when that happens, it's going to be a great day for horses.
Oh, it'll be a wonderful day to celebrate for horses. And you bring up a really good point regarding the horse, off-the-track thoroughbred, after he becomes a show horse and then he's old and needs a home, I've found at different conferences and events that I've attended, when I've asked the question, to the thoroughbred industry, what are you doing to ensure a safe future for these horses? Their answer is, well, we support aftercare programs, but in essence, that's not the solution.
No, it's not. And then we have thoroughbreds here that were also injured, and the most that they can have is to be pasture sound, and some of them are great horses. We have a 15-year-old horse here named Plato. He came to us with a cracked knee. Now, why should he be thrown away just because he couldn't be retrained to be ridden again? We've got to take responsibility regardless of what happens to these horses. And I think, there's that famous saying from Gandhi that all animal protection organizations use, but it's so true. The greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way it treats its animals. If you stop to think about what that means, it couldn't be any more truer today than when he said it, because the way we treat our animals is a reflection on us. And unfortunately, the way we treat horses doesn't say a lot about us as a culture. But I have hope that things will get better, but I think we have to end horse slaughter, and I think then we're going to start to see some results.
Has anyone, since her story has come out, stepped up from her past to help contribute or, make a difference in her future now that she's here?
Well, when she was rescued, there was quite a bit of press about her in Canada, and when she came here, there was more press about her. And so we actually have people coming just to see her. There was a woman from Canada who came down to see her when we had the summit here. So she definitely has a fan base, but you wonder why any horse would have to go through what she went through. It's just something that shouldn't be acceptable in our society. And I think that the horse industry has a long way to go. When they decide to take responsibility for their horses, that's the day when the public will support them more than they do now.
Well said. In my interview with Susan, I asked if while on the backstretch, she had any clue as to the number of thoroughbreds sent to slaughter. When you were at the racetrack for 15 years, was there any inkling about slaughter or where horses would go, or was there a cover-up as to where they would go?
Well, in those days, Aqueduct, Belmont, and Saratoga was the high echelon of racing, and so these horses would end up going to the smaller tracks like Finger Lakes and Mountaineer Park and Penn National, so you would never hear about it in New York. It was still at that time a very secretive industry. It's no longer secretive. Now it's all over the internet and more people know about it, but at that time, people just thought that some horses were killed for dog food, or they would say they would go to the glue factory, but they weren't. We had, I think in one year in the 90s at the height, there was something like 350,000 horses slaughtered, American horses, between the US and the ones that we sent to Canada. At that time, we weren't sending that many to Mexico. That happened later on. But now there's no slaughter in the United States, but we still are sending horses over the borders into Canada and Mexico, but we're hoping that this might be the year that it ends, and it could happen. I think we finally have reached that point, but it's been a long and rocky road, and there are still people, including organizations like the Farm Bureau, that are dealing with agricultural crops that still think it's okay to take horses that are treated with medications toxic to humans, to send those horses over our borders and to be sold to other countries for people to eat, even though we wouldn't eat it ourselves. And I find that to be really unconscionable. And there are factions of the horse industry that feel the same way, because we all know that slaughter is a garbage disposal for people in the horse industry or backyard breeders who don't want to take responsibility for their horses. And we also know that if we took away the option of horse slaughter, as I mentioned a couple of times, we would have a much healthier horse industry. And it would be a much better life for horses, because then people would have to figure out what to do. You know, like it or not, they would have to find a place for them, or they'd have to put them down humanely. But anything is better than slaughter.
Friends, to better understand the issues facing our horses, visit equineadvocates.org online. There you will find the resources you need to be part of the solution that will ensure a safe future for all horses. Are we going to do it right now? Rain Man is a registered miniature horse.
Susan, they're scarier than the big draft horses.
They are.
He is the official greeter at Equine Advocates.
This is Rain Man, and he's one of Equine Advocates' founding horses. I got him in 1994, the same year as I rescued Gandalf. He came from Staten Island, and he was rescued by a woman who couldn't keep him. So the year I got Gandalf, we picked him up, and sadly, Gandalf died a year before we got this property. But Rain Man is still here, and he's one of my founding horses. He's one of my co-founders. If there's one thing we're trying to show, is that this place, we tried to create a model for the way horses should live and give them what they need. It doesn't have to be fancy. They just need to have enough room to roam and good nutrition and the company of other horses, in addition to getting their vet care and farrier care and dental care. But they have certain needs, and if people can provide those needs, I don't think there's anything more rewarding than having a horse.
Equine Advocates is home to 85 remarkable horses, ponies, donkeys, and mules. Far too many to cover in one episode. Next week, we'll return to the sanctuary to meet Hank the Tank and Henry.
I have pictures of him when we first got him, and his face was covered with slashes from a whip.
Nelson and Hayden.
If he could talk, he would say, "I'd rather be on the range."
And my girl, Annie.
What a beautiful girl.
Plus, we'll deliver a gift from Dover Saddlery.
This is for you.
Thank you.
For the horses here, just a little bucket of treats. It's
Thank
Dover
you.
is.
Well, that's a wrap for this episode of Real Horse Rescues. Friends, don't let this summer pass without experiencing the beauty of this sanctuary for yourself. Come meet and discover the magic and the majesty of the horses you've seen in today's show. I'm Susan Kane, and I'll see you next week.
Okay, this is Rain Man, and he has a very special, well, if he's going to be fresh, then we're going to have to, all right.
There you go.
Rain Man, come here. Come over here. Sadly, this scenario is not Press. What's the matter? All right, I'm going to have to put a halter on you. He ended up coming here. Oh. Well, it wouldn't be bad if just the two of them. Let's maybe get a shot of the two of them putting their heads together, and then I'll come back in the shot.
Careful back there, Roger. You're getting brave.
This one's pretty funny too. He's just too funny.
He's so expressive.
Yeah, he is.